Hello and welcome. Are parents actually limiting their children when they push them into professions such as medicine, engineering and law? Record unemployment and reduced opportunities around the world may be forcing young people to think outside the box and become more entrepreneurial. But it seems that the education system is not keeping up. The youth unemployment rate globally has hit a record high of 81 million, and the number is rising. Today, graduates are finding that despite a good education, they don't have the skills they need to succeed in the traditional workplace. So what are the options? Where do young people learn what they need to become entrepreneurs, to establish and grow their own businesses? It's a trend that may reshape the workforce dramatically in the years to come. So today we ask, how can young people learn the right skills to build a secure future in an increasingly competitive world? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. You can send an SMS or email, and we welcome your phone calls on the show. Well, a little later in the program, we'll examine how young people in emerging countries are using technology to build their own businesses. But now I'm joined from Vancouver by someone described as a business coach. Cameron Herold is the founder of Backpocket COO, a consulting group working with corporations. He's also focused on empowering young people through entrepreneurship, something he feels the current education system lacks. Mr. Herold, good to have you on the show.
Thanks, Riz. Appreciate it.
Pleasure. You know, on this show, some time back, we had Sir Ken Robinson, the author of The Element, who's always been very critical of the traditional education system for being very short-sighted and an archaic legacy from the industrial age, as he sees it. Now, I wonder, do you agree? And if so, where can young people, get the right kind of information they need for this changing world?
Yeah, I very much agree with Sir Ken Robinson's talks. I've seen him on TED as well, where my talk was featured earlier this year. I think one of the things that I noticed growing up in the education system and now having two young children that are in the school system today is it always seems to be they get pushed towards the middle. Instead of being told that there is no box, they're always told to stay within some kind of boundaries that are set up by the education system. And children are often taught to strive for the good jobs, which are doctor, lawyer, dentist, teacher, politician, God forbid. And they're told to kind of strive for those jobs, but they're not told that being an entrepreneur is a great thing. And then when children show these signs of being entrepreneurial, they're often pushed to go to business school or an MBA program. And from my experience and even seeing people coming out of the MBA schools, they tend to get pushed back towards being middle managers in kind of average corporations in North America instead of being entrepreneurial.
Let me ask you then, let's take it to that first step. How could the entrepreneurial spirit, first of all, be fostered in young kids? How would you go about doing that?
First off, it's really by noticing what a lot of the entrepreneurial traits are in people, in entrepreneurs, and then looking to find those in children. We can notice what artistic traits are or musical traits are in adults, and we can see children that are musical. We can see kids that have good design ideas as young kids. Well, in entrepreneurs tend to be good speakers. They tend to be good problem solvers. They tend to be strong leaders. Entrepreneurs tend to also be bipolar. We tend to have manic depression or certainly a lot of signs of bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder is nicknamed the CEO disease. Entrepreneurs tend to have a lot of ADHD or ADD. I actually have 18 of the 19 signs of attention deficit disorder. So you can notice a lot of those traits in entrepreneurs. Now, if you back that up and look in the grade school systems, you'll see the kids that are being told to sit still and pay attention and stop talking in front of the class, and why can't you just listen, and stop selling stuff to the kids. Well, those are all the children that are actually entrepreneurial. Those are their natural traits, and we're trying to squash them instead of saying, hey, let's nurture those traits.
Well, that's something that does.
You can find kids.
Yeah, I was going to say that's something that intrigues me is how when kids do show this sort of high level of activity, that I guess in my time as a kid it was just someone who was like high spirited, but I guess now it's a case of stick them on the drugs and try to control them through medication.
Yeah, it's a shame. I think we're actually, through Ritalin, we're actually destroying the next generation of entrepreneurs. If you look at Ted Turner, Richard Branson, Steve Jobs, the three founders of Netscape, I could go on and on. Bill Gross, all of them actually have bipolar disorder. Steve Jobs has been diagnosed as hypomanic. He's unable to see the box, let alone stay within a box. And I think if we could find those traits in children and nurture them, if we said to a kid, hey, you're unable to sit still and you're a great speaker, why don't we get you some speaking training? Why don't we get you a public speaking coach? I won a citywide speaking competition in grade 3, but I was told to get a French tutor. Well, I'm still terrible at French. And I actually do public speaking around the world for paid audiences. I've done it in 17 countries. But they didn't notice those traits in me and nurture them.
Yeah, I was going to put an email to you actually, just taking the conversation forward. Sorry, we're battling the satellite delay a bit, but let me put this email from Uganda that came in from Brian Cisnono, who says, a lack of leadership and inspiration from political, business and religious leaders is why youth are not encouraged to see past what's in front of them. And I wonder that even if people develop these entrepreneurial skills, even if these talents are recognized, how much there's really an opportunity for them to exploit those talents in the real world.
I think there's a huge opportunity. What I notice about entrepreneurs is we don't actually follow necessarily the rules of state or the rules of society. We actually see a problem or we see an opportunity and we go build a business around it. And we use our quick start and our high energy and our ability to grab control and to get people to follow us, and we start things. So, entrepreneurs tend to drop out of school. We don't tend to stick with the school system. No. A large majority of entrepreneurs, if they go to university, are kind of frustrating through it. So there's huge opportunities for entrepreneurs globally to get started. The key is to just start.
Cameron, let me ask you, when you coach people on this, I mean, how you coach them through the entrepreneurial path, so to speak, along that path, because I gather you talk about different stages. There's the excitement of starting up a business initially, then there's of course fear factor coming in and how it might go, how to cope with it. Tell me how you take people through the stages of entrepreneurship.
Sure. One of the things I do with entrepreneurs is I talk to them about the emotional roller coaster ride of being an entrepreneur, and that first stage of irrational exuberance or uninformed optimism can be a very good stage, and it can be a very exciting stage. It can also be very dangerous. So I try to show them what to do and what not to do at that stage. And then as they kind of go over top of the curve and they start seeing some new information and get a little bit nervous, again, there's good things and bad things to be doing at each stage. So I just talk to them about each of the stages of the roller coaster ride and what to do and what not to do and how to leverage the stages that they're at, because the reality is they're going to ride the emotional roller coaster. I think when you're an entrepreneur, the ups and downs get magnified. And if we can magnify our mania, if we can stand in front of groups, do press releases, do sales calls, talk in front of our employees, they'll follow us. You can recite the alphabet to people when you're manic and they'll listen to you. And then when you're highly stressed, that's not the time to be talking to the media, it's not the time to be talking to sales teams, it's not the time to be doing marketing. It's the time to maybe do planning and do meetings and to figure out exactly what your strategy is going to be going forward. So the reality is we're going to ride these ups and downs. They get magnified because of the pressure that we put ourselves under as an entrepreneur and the risk and the money at times that we put on the line, and the fact that we don't have anyone else to turn to. We don't have a boss who's telling us what to do. As the CEO, it can often be very lonely, which is why organizations like the Young Presidents Organization or EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization, can be quite valuable because it's a peer group of entrepreneurs who can learn from each other.
Okay, we've got an email from Australia, if I may put this to you. It's from Ali Hawar, who wrote in saying, the global education system has failed and it's time for a new approach. Who says 12 years of school should be the standard? Do you feel there's any real effort? I mean, is there any real opportunity to rethink the educational system to take into account the issues you've raised here?
I think the education system is already being rethinked as we speak. I think you see a lot of the leaders in society are starting to realize that we either need private education system for the kids or we just kind of avoid it. I've already talked to my wife about it, that I'm not going to be pushing my kids into university. What we are doing is putting our money into joining the right golf clubs, the right tennis clubs, so that our kids can meet the right next connectors in society. I'm putting my kids to be meeting the next business leaders in the Vancouver and in Canada so that they actually have those connections going forward. And I want them to get and grow and learn from experience and working with different businesses to explore their skills versus spending 4 years in university at a cost of $25,000 a year and coming out in debt and being pushed towards mediocrity. Now, I'm not a huge fan of the university or right. Education. You're
talking really about networking, and I wonder to what degree, when you look at the different layers of society, whether that kind of opportunity exists across the board. Because of course, if it's about networking, when it comes to parts of the society where their economic situation is tough, they won't have those kind of opportunities.
I disagree. My first job, I was making very, very far below minimum wage, and I took the most menial jobs I could, but what I tried to do was find jobs at a golf club where I would meet the connectors. I found friends of mine went to try to get the highest paying construction job they could find with a union, and they were making 5 times the amount of money I made, but they didn't meet anyone. So what happened was I completely fast-tracked them over the course of my career because I was building out my network and I was focused on who I was connecting with versus how much I was making. And I think there's a lot of people that can figure that out, and we can teach people that. It's not necessarily about how much money you're making each day, it's about who you're meeting and who you're learning from. You think about Jeff Immelt, who's the chairman and CEO of General Electric, sat beside Steve Ballmer, who's this current CEO of Microsoft. They sat beside each other in one of their jobs 30 years ago. I don't really think it's a coincidence that those two were hanging out together.
Let me ask you, with the situation being pretty tough, with the unemployment situation being so tough for young people, what the prospect is, or let's say to what degree they're being driven to being entrepreneurs because they can't expect traditional jobs.
Yeah, it's interesting. Someone the other day at a dinner party asked me if being an entrepreneur is risky, and I said, no, actually being an employee is risky. If you sit and rely on a company or a government to give you a job, especially when you look around now at massive unemployment, I see that as a huge risk. What I see as a big opportunity is the ability to notice opportunities and notice demand for things and create businesses around that. What I do with my children right now is I don't give them an allowance. I actually get them to notice things around the house that need to be done, and then they just negotiate with me on how much they would like to be paid to do those little tasks. So I'm getting them to spot opportunity and to negotiate and to learn how to market themselves instead of building the reliance on a paycheck, which I think is a risk.
That's a great idea. I can see my household changing from now on. Cameron Harold, thank you very much. It's great to have you on the show.
Thanks, Riz. I appreciate it.
Thanks. We've got to take a short break now. When we return, how are young people in emerging economies using technology to become entrepreneurs and move their communities out of poverty? We'll be right back. Welcome back. China's rapid economic rise has many economists predicting that the country could soon dominate the global marketplace. But my next guest is not so convinced. He says India's youthful demography will be the driving force behind the global economy. Rob Salkowitz is an entrepreneur and consultant specializing in social and next-generation technologies. His latest book, Young World Rising, highlights the power of the young in emerging economies and how they will be the mobilizing force for the future. Rob, good to have you on the show.
Great to be with you.
Of course, the shape of the world is shifting a lot, and the demographics are such that we have developing nations finding their population, the young population growing like crazy, while the developed world has got an older population which needs looking after. So we have a shift in where the workforce is and where the dependents are. How do you think that's going to shape the way the workforce develops over the years to come?
Well, half the world's population today is under the age of 30, but a lot of the youngest people live in some of the world's poorest countries. And just even a decade and a half ago, that's a recipe for bad news. But what's changed is that there's been the spread of information technology networks that allow these young people to connect to communities, to new sources of information, to new resources that empower them in ways that they've never seen before. And I think the combination between those youthful demographics and the power of these new technologies really opens the door to a new kind of entrepreneurship that's very exciting and very transformative.
Well, actually, I do want to get an email to you because this email that came in from Uganda, from Adoko Oteli, touches on something that's interesting based on what we're talking about here. It says, with educational systems so focused on memorizing the correct answers, it is no wonder why there is no innovation coming from locals. This leads to developing countries to rely on foreign investors to steer the economy. And that is another issue, isn't it? That we've got the developing world having to buy in talent from the developed world. I wonder again how that will shift the job markets.
Actually, I'd like to disagree somewhat with your emailer there. What I've seen is over the last 10 years, there's been a lot of investment by outside organizations, by NGOs, and also by information technology companies in creating a kind of critical mass of skills and knowledge within indigenous communities. And now we're starting to see that bear fruit. We're starting to see grassroots indigenous entrepreneurs connecting to information networks which have very low barriers to entry. Right, so you can start a company that creates iPhone apps or creates something on the Facebook platform, and really the only capital that you need to do something like that is between your ears. And we get these young entrepreneurs from all over the place. I've seen entrepreneurs in Uganda and elsewhere in Africa, in Latin America, in South Asia, creating really mind-blowing, great companies, interesting business models, based entirely on local resources, on our local innovation.
Well, of course, with China, you have a lot of entrepreneurs as well, and the country, the size of it, means that there's a huge market for them to tap into, as well as the global market, which China, of course, is playing in with greater force. And I wonder what you feel, because you say China shouldn't be thought of as an emerging market. You say it's already emerged.
Yeah, China is the world's second largest economy right now, and they have modernized and developed infrastructure at such a pace that they really don't fit into the narrative of emerging economies anymore. That's not to say that China is an unimportant story. I think it's the most significant business story of this half century. But the thing about China is their demographics are very strange. They are currently a median age of about 33. Over the next 40 years, they're going to age more rapidly than any society in human history. And by mid-century, they're looking at a median age in the upper 40s. So the youthful energy and the advantage that they're getting from the demographic dividend of their young workforce right now is not going to last. They're going to turn a corner in the 2020s, right. And by the end of that decade, India is going to surpass them.
Well, just quickly on China, presumably that's because of the one-child policy that demographic is going to change.
That's correct.
Right. Now, India, let's look at India then, because why do you see India as so special? Is it just simply the youthful force there, or is there a different kind of spirit, like in terms of entrepreneurial spirit, for example?
Well, I think India has historically always been a very entrepreneurial culture. I think in the years since independence, their government policies have not always supported those instincts, but they have been liberalizing their policies considerably to open the door to new kinds of entrepreneurship, new kinds of industries. And I think the success of indigenous entrepreneurial businesses like Infosys has really created a template, a role model for saying, this is how we can succeed. We can create new businesses that are economically prosperous, that spread social value through talent and through knowledge and through people. And if there's one thing India has an awful lot of, it's people.
What about the sort of the gap that occurs there between the have and have-nots? Because of course there's a portion of portion of the population in India that's growing very quickly, but there's still a huge amount of poverty there.
Yes, it's a tremendous problem, and it's something that, at least in the entrepreneurs that I've spoken to, is very much a top-of-mind issue to them. They recognize that the economic prospects for their businesses are tied intimately to being able to spread that prosperity more broadly and deeply through the Indian socioeconomic system. And so they're investing a lot of their own resources in training, in workforce development, in infrastructure development, and in the sorts of things that will eventually help to lift, those hundreds of millions of people into a better standard of life.
Well, an email we got from the UK from Zarka Anwar touches on this issue. It says, students from poor backgrounds are unable to compete with those who have money for things like books, tutors, and the internet. These resources should be made equally available to all students. And I wonder to what degree, I mean, you're saying India, actually, there is some focus on that, but to what degree, when you look at the developing world, there is an effort to try to address the education issue?
There is. And then also speaking to what your previous guest was talking about, a lot of the entrepreneurial businesses that are starting in these countries are founded by offbeat, non-traditional people who, when they're looking to hire new people themselves for their new businesses, are looking outside of the traditional educational system, are looking beyond the kinds of credentials and backgrounds that you traditionally associate with middle management and success. And I know of a young man in India that I talked to named Wasim Mohammed, who was out of one of these vocational backgrounds, not necessarily from the elite status, was working in a call center, got an opportunity to work in an entrepreneurial company, and has become a real leader and a real innovator at a young age. And that kind of company gives young people that don't have the full polish of educational credentials broader opportunities for dignified, rewarding employment and opportunities to build their own skills further.
I wonder to what degree also the issue of employment and opportunity is one that concerns national security. When you look at the Middle East, for example, there's an issue that there's such a high level of unemployment in certain areas with young people, young men in particular, for example, stuck on the streets, that they're more vulnerable to being drawn into extremism, being recruited and so on. I wonder how much that's a factor that has to be taken into account.
Well, this is one of the real upsides of these knowledge economy businesses, because unlike manufacturing or natural resources businesses and things like that only require capital and physical labor, knowledge economy businesses require an educated workforce. And the kinds of opportunities that are created in the knowledge economy are better paying jobs, they lead to upward social mobility, and I think as that middle class emerges throughout these troubled regions, that they add stability to the political process, they add their voices to the political dialogue, and these are voices for moderation, they're for continued reinvestment in prosperity and knowledge. So that's how that cycle starts.
And I presume also, that, Rob, that means that, that these countries that have an opportunity to leapfrog technologically, as we say, they have that opportunity to build their workforce at a faster rate than those in the developed world, where there is already a sort of an antiquated infrastructure that has to be dismantled or at least overridden.
Yeah, I mean, the advantages of legacy in the industrialized world are rapidly becoming handicaps, because you have to spend all of this money to refresh the infrastructure, to bring in new people, to manage the transition. In many ways, the emerging economy represents a blank slate. And the first dollars that you spend on infrastructure can be right up to the minute technology and right up to the minute, thinking and business practices, so that you don't have to carry the burdens of all of these bad ideas around with you into the future.
Well, let me get an email in the last minute we have here from Australia, from Mariam El-Shemi in Brisbane, who wrote in saying, the digital age has softened a lot of young people up. Many of them opt to stay inside playing games rather than learning or earning a living. They've been brought up lazy and can't keep up. So I wonder, could technology also be seen as a hindrance as well? Just 30 seconds on that.
Yeah, actually, I mean, there's some great stories of young people that, are video gamers that then start video game companies. There's a young man in Egypt who did this, and it's actually pioneering a new industry in that country. So, for every technology, there's pluses and minuses. And if we focus on the pluses, I think we'll get pretty far ahead.
Rob Sarkowitz, thank you very much for joining us there. It was good to have your perspective on this issue.
Thanks, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And thank you for being with us. Remember, you can follow the show via Facebook and see what we're covering there. Be sure to post your questions and comments so that we can include them on the program. On the next show, targeting terrorism. As nations around the world ramp up their fight against extremism, are the very laws designed to protect our freedoms actually taking away our rights? Be sure to tune in for that. From me and the team, we'll see you next time.